Well, I don't know about you. I'm often inspired by stories where people come from nothing and become something, right? Like, you can look at someone like J.K. Rowling's or Jim Carrey or Oprah or Jay-Z, and you see these people who came from nothing, who had all the cards stacked against them, but were able to prevail, were able to rise above it and become something. One of my favorite stories of rags to riches is actually from right here in Appalachia. In 1946, this little daughter was born to a poor tobacco farmer and a stay-at-home mom. She was one of 12 kids. They lived in a 2-bedroom house with no electricity, no running water, oftentimes sharing a bed with 3 to 4 siblings. In high school, it was thought that she would be the least likely to succeed in her graduating class. Yet at 18, she moves to Nashville as an aspiring musician, and the rest is history, right? She becomes an iconic singer-songwriter, businesswoman, actress, author, and philanthropist. And you probably know who I'm talking about, the one and only Dolly Parton, old Dolly, right? And so when I see people that have come from nothing and become something, I admire the work ethic. I admire the resiliency, the grit, the ability to get up after being knocked down time and time again. I admire the ability to push through in the face of opposition. And so I think those qualities are admirable. I want to embody those myself, but here's the deal, right? If those qualities are not kept in perspective, if those qualities are not kept into perspective, they will breed a spirit of self-reliance and independence. And what you need to know is that spirit of independence will become one of the biggest stumbling blocks to your faith, right? And so in light of that temptation to be self-reliant and independent, let's look at Genesis chapter 32. So we're talking about the life of Jacob. Last week, we talked about Jacob and the ladder, his dream. Today, we're going to talk about Jacob wrestling with God. But if you're like, who in the world is Jacob? Well, if you study the Bible, old father Abraham, Jacob is his grandson. His dad is Isaac. He has a twin brother named Esau, who's just a little bit older than him. And so in his life, early on, he deceives his dad, tricking him to receive a blessing that was intended for his brother Esau. Esau is livid. He's mad. It literally says that he soothed himself to sleep at night by sharpening a knife and dreaming of the day that he could kill his brother Jacob. Because of that, he flees. He goes to a foreign land where he falls in love with a girl named Rachel. But then Jacob, the deceiver, gets out-deceived by his future father-in-law, right? And so his father-in-law deceives him. By the time that we get to where we are now, he has 2 wives. That's one wife too many. He has 11 sons, right? And for the last 20 years, he's been dealing with a crooked and shady father-in-law. Now, after 20 years away from home, God is calling him to return. God is saying, hey, I need you to go back to the land that I promised you that you'd become a great nation in, all right? So that's where we pick up in chapter 32, starting in verse 1. It says, Jacob went on his way, and the angels of God met him. And when Jacob saw them, he said, this is God's camp. So he called the name of the place Mahanaim. I'm just going to say that like I think I know how to pronounce it. And Jacob sent messengers before him to Esau, his brother, in the land of Seir, to the country of Edom, instructing them, thus you shall say to my lord Esau, thus says your servant Jacob, I have sojourned with Laban and stayed until now. I have oxen, donkeys, flocks, males, servants, and female servants. I have sent to tell my Lord in order that I may find favor in your sight. So Jacob at this point, he is set out to return home, but he knows that he's going to have to deal with his past in this journey. Right? He's going to have to meet his brother Esau again. And as I was reading on this, one of the questions that was asked is, was there another way? Like, was there a way around it that he could have somehow got to where he was going without meeting his brother Esau? And the truth is physically, yes, there was another way for him to go, but spiritually, no. spiritually, he had to deal with his past. And this is an important thing for us to hear this morning. When it comes to your past sins, you can't just ignore them as if they've never happened. You have to deal with them. And oftentimes, dealing with your past is the very thing you need to do so that you can get to where God is bringing you. And so here is Jacob spiritually needing to deal with his past. So he sends messengers to get a finger on the pulse. He's like, hey, you guys go ahead, talk to Esau, maybe see how he's feeling. Let's see how he feels about me. There's been 20 years. Who knows if anything's changed? And what's interesting is when he sends his messengers, he refers to his brother Esau as Lord, right? Lowercase L, but Lord. He refers to himself as Esau's servant. Now, if you look at his life, for his whole life, he was always trying to elevate himself above Esau. And now we find him willingly placing himself under Esau, which cues us in that God is working on his heart. We're starting to see not a spirit of pride, but a spirit of humility in Jacob's heart, right? But the question is we know God is working on Jacob's heart, but is he working on Esau's heart, right? And so that's what he's sending messengers to get a finger on the pulse of. And so picking up in verse 6, and the messengers returned to Jacob saying, we came to your brother Esau, and he is coming to meet you. And there are 400 men with him. That's a small army, right? Then Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed. He divided the people who were with him and the flocks and herds and camels into two camps, thinking, if Esau comes to the one camp and attacks it, then the camp that is left will escape. And so he finds out that there are 400 men, a small army coming his way, and he has a personal strategy. He goes, all right, I'm going to divide my family. So half of you guys go this way, half of you guys go this way. And his thought process is, man, if Esau shows up and attacks one, at least half of my family will survive. But he knows that his strategies alone are not enough. Right? He knows his strategies alone are not enough. So pick it up in verse 9, we're going to see Jacob praying. And Jacob said, verse 9, O God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, O Lord, who said to me, return to your country and to your kindred that I may do you good. I am not worthy of the least of all the deeds of steadfast love and all the faithfulness that you have shown to your servant. For with only my staff, I crossed this Jordan, and now I've become two camps. Please deliver me from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, that he may come and attack me and mothers with my children, the mothers with my children. But you said, verse 12, but you said, I will surely do you good and make your offspring as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for multitude. Now, what's interesting is in Jacob's life, this is the first time we have him praying. Maybe he prayed in the past, but it's never been recorded. So this is the first prayer of Jacob. And as he prays, he confesses his unworthiness, which shows that he is fully relying on God's mercy and grace. He's not banking off of anything that he brings to the table, anything that he can earn. If God does something, it's by mercy and grace alone. But he asks for God's help. And then in verse 12, we see that his ultimate confidence in this journey, his ultimate confidence rests not in who he is and what he can do, not in his strategies, but in who God is, what God has done, and what God has promised to do. So his greatest confidence is not in himself, but in God. Okay, jump down to verse 22. The same night, he arose and took his two wives, his two female servants, and his 11 children, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. He took them and sent them across the stream and everything else that he had. And Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until the breaking of the day. I don't know if you've ever played sports or had a pregame ritual. You know, you can look at people like Patrick Mahomes and Steph Curry. They've got their pregame rituals. Maybe you're a runner and you're doing a race, and so the night before, like, you make sure that you're hydrated, you pound some pasta and get a good night's sleep. But the pregame, right? The pregame ritual is to get your mind right for the task that you're going to face, right? So here we have Jacob who's getting ready to wrestle with this stranger, but he doesn't know it, right? For him, he's thinking that tomorrow I'm going to battle my brother Esau. Right, and so he's pre-game ritualing here, so to speak. He's spending the night trying to get his mind right and to get ready for the task that is at hand. So I want you to kind of be a fly on the wall, a bird in the tree. Maybe you're watching this unfold, and here's Jacob. He's alone. He's peacefully praying. He's trying to get in the right mental space for tomorrow. And then out of nowhere, he gets taken out, right? Have you ever seen someone just get taken out? My son plays travel baseball, and oftentimes like you'll have 4 fields that back up to a central kind of location. And on one field, a foul ball will be hit. And then you'll hear people say like, heads. And no joke, like you'll see someone get taken out by a foul ball. Oftentimes someone's grandma, just whack, done. And like the grandma hits the ground, you're like, oh, foul ball, right? I was helping out at my kids' school, and they were teaching them how to golf. And so I'm not a golfer, but I'm there to help out. And they've got clubs, they've got balls, and there's a mom trying to photograph for the PTA webpage, right? And she's sitting there and she's got the perfect angle on this kid, and she's framed him up and she's ready to click, and then whack, club to the head, and she gets dropped, right? Like the imagery here of Jacob wrestling with a stranger is that he gets assaulted, that out of nowhere, he gets taken out, right? So Jacob is unexpectedly taken down. He's wrestling and he's determined not to lose. And so at this point, we just know it's a stranger. What we're going to find out later in the story is that he's actually wrestling with God, right? Verse 25, when the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he touched his hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. This is a significant moment in his life when his hip gets wounded, because now he's going to walk with a limp. This makes me think of my grandma Bentley. Okay, my grandma she's no longer with us, but she is the strongest woman I've ever known in my life. And I don't say that lightly, because I think my mom's strong. I think Lucy, my wife, is strong. I'm hoping that we're raising 2 strong daughters. But my grandma Bentley is one of the strongest women I've ever known. And so even in her old age, she was a very independent person, right? She would do everything. She would mow her yard. She would clean her house. She would do all these tasks that many people would hire out. But one day she fell in the shower and shattered her hip. And because of the way that it broke, they weren't able to kind of just fix a break. It was like now they had to make one leg shorter than the other. And so all of a sudden she had this uneven gait. And because of this hip injury, she went from being independent to now having to rely on others. And it was, you could tell it was crushing for her to have to ask for help. And so what we see in Jacob's life is this guy is strong, right? Jacob is a strong man physically, but from this point forward, he's going to walk with a limp. From this point forward, as independent as he's been, he's going to have to start asking for some help. And so we'll see the significance of this moment here in a second. Verse 26, then he said, "Let me go, for the day has broken." That's God speaking. But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." And he said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." Then he said, "Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with men and have prevailed." Just take note of that word prevailed. We'll come back to that as well. All right, and so here we have Jacob, and God asks him, he says, "What is your name?" If you read through his life, you'll know this is not the first time that question was asked to him. I said earlier that he deceived his dad. So Isaac, in Isaac's old age, was nearly blind, right? Would you say he's blind as a bat? Like he couldn't see, and he's about to bless his son Esau. But then Rebecca, his mom, gets word of this and is like, "Hey, this is supposed to be for Jacob, not Esau. So we've got to do something." And so she comes up with the plan to have Jacob deceive Isaac into thinking that he's Esau so that he can receive the blessing. And it's a crazy story. I mean, he puts on his brother's clothes. Esau was a hairy dude. I think he was like a Ewok as a baby, a Wookiee as an adult. And so it says that he put animal skin on his hands to be hairy enough to fool his dad. And so as he's going to his dad's like, you smell like my son. He's like, let me touch your hands. Okay, like animal hair, that feels like my son. And he goes, what is your name? And Jacob, he chooses to lie. I don't know if he made his voice deeper. I assume Jacob had a tinier voice than Esau, like, I'm Esau. Like, but either way, he said he lies, and then he deceives his dad and receives the blessing that was meant for his brother. And so now we have not his earthly father, but his heavenly father asking the same question. What is your name? And he chooses to tell the truth. And he says, I am Jacob. And then God changes his name from Jacob to Israel. Right? And so why the name change? God changes his name because this wrestling match marks a significant moment in his life where he transitions from being physically strong but spiritually weak to from this day forward, he will be physically weak but spiritually strong. And so God changes his name to mark this significant transition in his life. All right, and so as we keep reading in verses 29 through 32, we read, then Jacob asked him, please tell me your name. But he said, why is it that you ask my name? And there he blessed him. So Jacob called the name of this place Peniel, saying, for I have seen God face to face. There's our cue that he's wrestling with God. I have seen God face to face, and yet my life has been delivered. The sun rose upon him as he passed Peniel, limping because of his hip. Therefore, to this day, the people of Israel do not eat the sinew of the thigh that is on the hip socket, because he touched the socket of Jacob's hip on the sinew of the thigh. All right, so as we look at this text, I have two questions. All right, two questions. One, out of all the things, why does God choose to appear as a man and wrestle with Jacob? Seems strange. It's like, out of all the things, like, why does God choose this wrestling match? And the second question I have, this bothers me, is what does it mean that he prevailed? Okay, because to prevail means to win, to be victorious. And if God is all powerful and always victorious, what does it mean that he prevailed? Did he somehow defeat God? Like, what does it mean that he prevailed? Okay, well, as we look at this, what we need to know is that there was a life-transforming lesson Jacob needed to learn. There was a life-transforming lesson that Jacob needed to learn. I mean, his whole life, he's been facing opposition, right? He's always been wrestling. He wrestled with his brother Esau in the womb. He wrestled for 20 years with a crooked and shady father-in-law. Now he's preparing, or was preparing, for another wrestling match with his brother. He's always faced opposition, but it seems like he always comes out on top, right? Like through his slyness, his smarts, his skill, his strength. He's always come out on top, but behind him is this just trail of brokenness, this trail of hurt, this trail of broken relationships. And the reason why there's so much brokenness is because to this point, he has been operating out of an unhealthy fear of man. Like, he's been operating out of a fear of man and what others could do to him. And the lesson he needed to learn was that he shouldn't fear man, but he should have a healthy fear of a holy God. And so he needed to realize that his greatest fear was not a man, but his greatest fear in a healthy way should be God and who he is. And so God is teaching him this lesson. All right. And so the big idea is this: when you begin to understand who you are in the light of who God is, you realize in all things, big or small, you are fully dependent on him, right? When you begin to understand who you are in light of who God is, you realize that in all things, you are fully dependent on God. I use my grandma Bentley as my first illustration. My second will be my grandma Martin. She's still kicking, right? And so Grandma Martin, her heart is failing her, and so she's got a pacemaker, and so she recently went to the doctor, and so her pacemaker has an 8-year life expectancy on the battery, and so she goes in for the checkup, and the doctor says, "I've got some bad news. Your heart is doing 0% of the work. You're fully dependent on this pacemaker." To which she got concerned because she was thinking, okay, if the deal was my heart does half, the pacemaker does the other half, and that's supposed to last 8 years, if it's doing all of it, does that now make it a 4-year life expectancy? And do we need to change this battery, right? Because if it goes out, there's no hope. There's no hanging on until you get to the hospital. And so the doctor assures her, no, like you're good for another 8 years. But the truth is my grandma, because of her heart failure, is at all times, whether she realizes it or not, she is fully dependent on the pacemaker. And so what we have to understand is what it means for us to be dependent on God is that our confidence is not in who we are and what we can do, but our confidence is in who God is, what he has done, and what he promises to do. This is how Jacob prevailed. You see, when it says that he prevailed, his victory wasn't in defeating God. His victory was in defeating himself and the deception of self-reliance and independence. So his blessing is realizing that I need God and God is always with me. All right, so as we wrap up, let me ask you a question. Where are you wrestling in life right now? Like, where do you find yourself wrestling in life? Maybe it's with your marriage. Your marriage is falling apart. Maybe it's at work. Just things are a wreck. Maybe it's with your finances and you're like, I'm not gonna make it much longer if this doesn't change. Maybe it's with a kid who's gone wayward. Maybe you're wrestling with depression or anxiety. I mean, we could keep going, but like, where are you wrestling right now? Listen to me on this. It's often in these difficult times that God cultivates in us an attitude of dependence on him as we learn to walk by faith. So as you think about like, where am I wrestling in life? Like, I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying that you're not going through the ringer, but it's often in these difficult times that God uses these situations to cultivate in us a healthy dependence as we learn to walk by faith. Back in 2009, I got to take my first trip to an orphanage. I spent a week in Guatemala in a little town called Sololá, working with orphan kids. And what was interesting about this time is that the orphanage, it was called the Eagle's Nest, and the guy who ran it had connections to all of these churches throughout the United States. And so they would take in kids off the street who were orphans, and then they would work to get them adopted by people in the United States. And so they had all this hope, right? Like there's no hope for me here, but I could come to a new family. And this new family is gonna position me for all these opportunities in life. And so these orphans all had this incredible hope because of the track record of him placing them with healthy and loving families. But in 2009, Guatemala made a shift to where they were no longer doing foreign adoptions, where they would no longer let Americans adopt Guatemalans. And so now all of these kids, it's like, hey, you're not gonna be here for a short time and then go. This is where you're gonna live. This is where you're gonna grow up. And so what you saw with many of these orphans is they were transitioning from being hopeful to feeling hopeless, right? And so I say that because I don't know where you are today. Maybe life's going pretty good for you right now. I hope it is, right? Or maybe you're wrestling. Maybe you're wrestling. And the beautiful truth of the gospel is no matter where you are, Jesus is the true and better Jacob. And like Jacob wrestling with God, Jesus wrestled with God at the cross. But instead of fighting for his life, he willingly gave it up, taking upon himself our sin in the abandonment that we deserve. But Jesus prevailed. He rose again. And through faith in his victory, we don't have to live as spiritual orphans. We can live as those who are adopted by our Heavenly Father. We can live as his beloved children, knowing that he loves us, knowing that he will never leave us or forsake us, that he will be with us in everything we're walking through, and knowing that he has promised in all things to work it to the good of those who love him. So this text for me, this is a mile marker in my faith. Honestly, it's why I'm here at Redeemer, because it was through this text that God shaped me to be fully dependent on him. And so when I applied for this job 9 years ago, I was saying, God, I bring nothing to the table. It doesn't matter smarts, skills, strength. Like if you don't show up, I have no business leading a church, no business being here. But it was through this and the confidence that it's no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me that I said, okay, God, I'm going to throw my hat in, not because I have confidence in who I am and how I can lead, but because I have confidence in who you are in me and how you can lead. And so for me, this is a mile marker story for my own faith. And I don't know where you're leaning into that self-reliance and that independence, but I'm telling you, like if you would let God shape your attitude to be fully dependent on him, you'll be amazed at the places that he'll take you in life. And so I want to encourage you that whatever you're facing in life, that you would find your hope not in who you are and what you can do, but in who God is, what he has done, and what he promises to do. God, thank you for your word. I confess that I oftentimes fall back into the deception of self-reliance and independence. And God, when I operate in my own strength, things eventually fall apart. But God, in your love, you give us strength to make it through. So Father, if someone's here this morning in a situation where they feel like if you don't show up, they're not going to make it, God, I ask that you would give them a great confidence in who you are, and that they would feel your presence by their side. But God, wherever we are, good times or hard, I ask that you would help us to know that we are always fully dependent on you, and you are always with us. That's in your holy name we pray. Amen.